Welcome to Convo Fango. Today we are joined by the writer, director, and stars of Children of the Corn. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Thanks for having us, Angel.
That's the right pronunciation, right? Children of the Corn. Is that how you casually?
No, there's 3 syllables in corn. That's correct.
Corn.
Yeah.
Children of the Corn. All right. So this one kind of like the story sort of imagines what might have happened before the story that we're all very familiar with. So what made you want to take that particular approach to this?
Well, yeah, so you're asking me that. Well, for the obvious reasons, because the other story's been told.
It's a good reason.
and also, it's, to me, the more interesting story by far, because if this is about children who are discovering or seizing their agency in the world, in a world that's going straight to hell, taken there by the adults, then the children, the victims, they've always been the victims to me. And I actually never understood making the adults the victims, because, if you just look at it, it's like saying, oh, the puppy dogs are the villains in this movie, and I'm like, no, I mean, I just instinctively and emotionally, I can't identify with that. So I wanted to tell the story through the children's eyes and say, well, okay, given the fact this is a genre movie, but how can we sort of reasonably get the audience there where, like, okay, I can see why kids might actually decide, screw this. This is our future and you guys aren't going to be there, but you're so corrupt and you're so petty and you're so myopic and you're destroying the world. I'm going to take it over for myself.
Nice. And we kind of get 2 different approaches to that. We have Beau's approach where it's kind of like, all right, it's an environmental story and it's environmental horror. And then we have Eden, who takes a very different approach to that and is like, I'm going to take the Sith in my hands, so to speak. And it's like, we get to see how that plays out with both of those 2 options at play.
That's true. And if I can just interject though, but I think they're both fighting for the same thing. It's because these children, they play in the corn. That's why they have that sort of long scene where they're playing in the corn. This is where they, in Nebraska, this is where these kids just play. I mean, that's their world, is the corn, and now it's dying. So for them, it's an environmental disaster too. It's actually a world disaster for them. So I think they're dealing with the same thing. They just come up with a different kind of math for dealing with it.
Yes.
One bleeds more than the other.
One says blood and one says, I'm going to college and I'm going to figure out the answer to this.
Yeah.
I love it. What when you guys read this script, what part of it were you most excited about? Like, what part were you like, oh, I absolutely have to be in on this?
I'm just going to say right here, right now, Angel, because you're a horror girl. I am a horror fanatic. Okay. Like my mom and I have like a tradition, like literally like every night, if we're all home, like we scour for the horror movies we have not seen. Okay. And we rank them. Like, it is intense. So I had never done a horror film before. And when this script came along, I was like, ooh, Children of the Corn, like immediately, what? And I'm going to react this. And it was like so scary. And like He Who Walks is actually going to be in it. Like, what? So I freaked out. And I don't know if Kate the same way, but like as an actor, like you always hope to have like an opportunity to unleash your horror scream too in an old school classic horror movie. So this was that opportunity, and it was Australia. Like, forget it, I was sold. That was a bucket list thing for me to shoot anything in Australia. And then you add in, we did it like at the height of COVID. Like the whole thing is just insane. But we managed to do the whole thing.
Amazing.
Your horror scream or your horror tears?
Okay, but
do you remember? Like, you remember that I came and you said, "Are you crying?" Because our monitors were so lousy, I couldn't. And I was like, "She's crying." She's crying.
But the one thing that is not good in horror that
words
is he came up to me and he says, "Okay, yeah, the crying good. Okay, yeah, scream. But Elena, please stop walking like a duck." That was like the big issue. And in every scene, he's like, "The duck walk. We got to work on the walk." I didn't forget that, Kurt. That is like the.
I know.
Right.
Don't worry. I just swung a lens and tightened up on you. It's okay.
So that's why we never see your legs in the whole movie. Okay, that makes sense now. It's always very tight shots. I'm just teasing.
Coming out now. You're spilling all the tea for you, Angel.
Now we have to get like some sort of like foul horror where it's like we can incorporate the duck walk, and that is like somehow in there, and then they're like, one of us.
Yeah, ducks for the corn, or like
yes. It's in there. I mean, it's a work in progress. We can work with that. Kate, are you a horror fan? Were you a horror fan coming into this?
No, I don't like horror movies at
You
all.
don't? No, absolutely not.
I'll watch the odd one if I already know what happens. I like spoiling movies for myself, just so I'm not like scared the entire time.
Okay.
No, I don't like horror movies, but this one was interesting because it's not specifically like jump scares and gore and all this like slasher movie type of stuff. It was more the underlying message and all the layers, and I thought that's going to be a really interesting thing to be able to portray and show to audiences.
You were very disturbing in this, by the way. Like the pirate scene, when we first see all the kids together playing and frolicking in the corn, and there's just something so feral about it already. And then just like, it's very Lord of the Flies. And then she's like, oh, I love the Red Queen. I'm like, not about this kid right now.
I've done my job then. I've done my job.
Yeah. So kudos to you. I say that as a compliment. You creeped me out. So well done. There's a lot of gruesome stuff in here. And I know a lot of times when people are working with younger actors, they try to kind of like shelter them from that. But I think in a lot of instances that wasn't possible here. So how did you all approach that? Because it wasn't like you could be like, okay, Kate, we're going to pretend you're not holding eyeballs in your hand, or pretend you're holding some, you know what I mean? Like it's all very like, you can't take away the context.
That doesn't, I mean, that may work in other films, but this film was about children. I mean,
yes,
it's half the title. I mean, there's corn and there's children. There's nothing else in this movie except a couple adults who get slaughtered, and you know they get to read the script before they make the movie, so they knew exactly what they were in for. And
honestly, Angel, like they weren't phased. Like I feel like they were like the Haney kids. They were like awesome blood. Like
they were like that's it.
They weren't with them. We were.
Oh
yeah, they were like that's it. Come on.
Like, that's all you got. Give us more.
I feel like my 11-year-old mind, I wasn't too like focused on what was happening. I was just getting blood squirted in my face, and I was holding these rubber eyeballs, and I was just going with it, you know.
Just a typical Tuesday, you know. Same as well. What was the most enjoyable part about this for you guys? I mean, I know you got to go to Australia, you got to hold eyeballs in your hand, but I mean, like, what was the most like extremely fun aspect of this?
I'll go.
Rap.
I think my favorite part, and I don't know if this is the same with you guys, but my favorite part was actually being, I don't want to say this, but COVID. It was a different experience, because usually when you're on set, you know, you see these people like for 9 hours a day, you go home, you may not see them for a while, but with this, we were like pretty much living together the entire time, and it helped us form like a bond that you may not normally form when you're filming a movie. So I feel like it helped make it more real. Like this whole small town, we were literally living together, so it felt more, the situation was actually real.
We were all neighbors of each other, like our rooms were next door. And they say, oh yeah, filming was like summer camp, but this was like times like 100. Yeah. So it was very much, we were all like together, we were having dinner together every night. Like it was we were all super close. But it is, you add in the aspect as well as shooting in a beautiful place like Australia. Like here I am again, Australia was just stunning. The terrain, the critters we were talking, you know, we saw wombats, we saw kangaroos. I saw kangaroos fighting, and then like not the drop bears, that's a thing. We will later beware the drop bears. But like I fell in love with the Australian spirit, like the grit and the tenacity of our crew. I mean, we are all still in contact with one another. I made my Siri, I programmed my Siri to have an Australian accent after that because I missed
Look, you so stayed much for another year after we finished shooting.
I stayed for a year.
But
you're like, I like it so much. You guys go ahead. I'll be here.
I'll never forget though. The thing that really stood out to me that encapsulated everything was when we were in Rylston shooting the quote unquote community center. And if you remember, I mean, at lunch, I remember sitting in the car going over the scenes that we were going to shoot for the rest of the day. And I remember how beautiful it was there. You remember in Rylston in the back, and all of the kids playing together. Yeah. Do you remember that? All of the kids, they were just going crazy. It was like a playground at recess, and all the kids playing together. And such closeness, such familiarity with these kids. I'll never forget that feeling and how beautiful it was.
If you could choose, I mean, obviously none of us would choose to live in COVID times, but if you could choose to, like, if this changed the way that movie making and like the way that sets worked, would you choose to have it this communal kind of experience on every set? Like, do you find that adds to just the camaraderie, the way that you work together?
It certainly helps the camaraderie, but honestly, I feel like it's been implemented. Like we kind of started the way, like, you know, the protocols that are being used now. What I'm seeing on the sets I'm working on, like it's similar. Obviously it's not exactly the same, but everything, like I know they established the actual like workbook or whatever, like that we started with the bubbles, with the cleaning station, with the testing, like everything. We were the first ones to like try all of that out, and it worked because we had a safe nucleus where we could feel safe and
No one got sick.
have fun. And we found our rhythm too. And the little ones, they were so good about it. Like they were respectful and disciplined, but we still could have fun with each other. So it was really an effort from every single person. And no one got COVID.
That's right. Nobody gets it. It's really a double-edged sword, though. It really worked for this film because it brought everybody together, and particularly the kids. You know, a lot of them who had never been in front of the camera before, and after being under the microscope in the way they were with cameras pointed at them all the time and having to sort of cohabitate together, something very unusual happened. Which is they forgot the camera was there, which is really, really hard to do. If you watch any movie that has, you know, a bunch of kids in it, you know, they're always sort of self-conscious. In this movie, I believe we reached a point where they lacked that self-consciousness. But so that was the positive. The negative was, though, that we were working on very, very short schedule, et cetera, et cetera. And we had to do things like literally we had to clear indoor sets every 25 minutes for 15 minutes, which was kind of voodoo. I mean, they're voodoo economics. They were making it up. Nobody knew whether it worked or not, but we had to do it. But on a very tight shooting days, I mean, it ate into the schedule tremendously. So we really had to buckle down and move because of that. So I don't like that aspect, but I really did like the communal aspect.
And let's not forget too, that element made it harder with the kids because we only had them for a certain amount of hours. Like it was really short amount of time. So I distinctly remember whenever after we do the kids coverage and we get to my coverage, half the time I'd have to read with a piece of tape because I'd lose Kate. Kate would have to go. So, but I had a kind director, Kurt Wimmer, who'd pop in and what would he do? He'd make sure I wouldn't have to deal with that. So he would read Eden's lines. So pretty much a lot of the movie, when I'm doing my dialogue, I'm actually talking to our director. And the brilliant part about this is he's the writer. So, okay, the script is like living rent free in his head. So he doesn't need to look at the lines. He's looking at me and like fierce, like he's a natural born performer and he's ad-libbing. So it's just so fiery and alive. So yeah, never gonna forget that. It was a treat.
Nice. And Eden Stand-in, played by Kurt Wimmer.
One of the other challenges was, I don't know if we covered this, but they both had to quarantine when they hit Australia. And they weren't expecting it. I mean, it was an unpleasant surprise when they got off after a very long flight from New Jersey in Canada to Australia. And these ladies were exhausted. And then they get off the plane and are like, oh, welcome to Australia. Go to this tiny hotel room. But it had an interesting effect because we could not rehearse. I mean, they were quarantined up until the day before we started shooting.
Whoa,
right? That was how tight everything was. It was really crazy. So we couldn't rehearse. So it forced us to go online and on the Zooms and just rehearse together. We spent a couple hours a day, each day rehearsing, and we made stuff up. Like I would just write scenes that didn't even exist. And we would just they would ad-lib it, they would improv it. And that's the way I've never worked before. And I'm pretty sure they haven't either. But, you know, it was interesting. And it really helped. And, you know, usually when you're in pre-production, you're so busy that like, oh, do we have time to rehearse today? But this really focused us. And so that was an added
benefit. But it kept us busy during quarantine. Like we had nothing to do. And I think we were neighbors. Kate and I were like next door to one another, but we couldn't, we would Zoom each other from next door. And then I know they drop off our clothes too. So we did our own fittings by ourselves in our own rooms and send pictures and FaceTime. But it's a very strange thing. You're reminding me, like, getting out of quarantine for 14 days, I thought I was going crazy. And the second I'm out, they were like, you need to get set right away. And they drove us there. And like, you go from like 4 walls to this massive cornfield and you're saying, okay, we're going to make a movie. This is happening.
Oh, this is happening.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but weren't you and Kate, even though you were separated by a 6-inch wall but not talking, weren't you playing cards together?
We were chatting and like,
I love that. That's awesome. And that also introduces like an element of play to it, I guess, and the kind of experimentation that you probably don't usually get to have because the schedules are so tight. And then this is kind of like, well, we're just figuring it out. You're in a hotel room for 2 weeks. I guess we can kind of play around with it.
It also helped too because we were able, because of COVID and, you know, the world was like, we weren't used to it. It's obviously super new. it kind of helped us like be alone with our emotions and really like
Mhm.
connect with our characters. I remember one time we were doing a Zoom call and it was all ad lib. And I think it was like doing scene, and I think I ended up crying. I don't know why. I felt so invested into it. I wasn't thinking about what was going on. So I feel like it was really a way to be able to like connect to the character. And I feel like that made it feel more real. Also, it added, I don't know, it just added more to the story, I feel like.
Well, whatever it was, it worked because, like I said, you creeped me out for sure. I know we have to go, guys. One last question. If you were able to adapt another Stephen King story, what would you choose?
It's such a complex, I mean, for me, I'll speak real quick for Chrissy. It's so complex because, you know, the really good ones have been done by really good people, De Palma and Kubrick, et cetera, you know, Shawshank. So they can't be done better. So I think would have to seed the field personally. And now, by the way, I actually did, I kind of stole one of his movies, Misery, and made it into a movie called Spell in 2019. So
kind of stole one.
I'll just, you know, I'll steal things in the future.
Nice. Okay.
I don't know. I'm just going with Angel's shirt choice because I've always loved The Shining.
There we go.
And you know, that is a masterpiece, but hey, I don't know. Let's see you can't go wrong with that. It's brilliant.
I'm not sure. I haven't read any Stephen King books. I probably should, even though I don't like horror movies.
We're gonna cast you guys as the Grady twins.
Of course.
I'm gonna have a version of the shirt, but it's your faces here instead. All right, thank you guys so much. This is great. Children of the Corn is going to be in theaters. He Who Walks. Yeah.